Three, two, one, and welcome back to the SBH podcast. And in this podcast, I'm going to talk about fishing for monster striped bass with topwater plugs. And it's something that I've had a lot of success with in the past few months, really, just catching some of the biggest fish of my season coming on topwater plugs. And all the different things that I've learned and what's gone wrong and what I am going to be changing and because it's funny because I've done other podcasts on topwater plugs and I've never been as successful as I am now with topwater fishing. But the evolution of my topwater fishing has been interesting, and how the gear has evolved has also been fairly interesting. So right now I really have my go-to topwater plug setups here. I mean, I got my rod, my reel, my line, everything that I'm 99.9% of the time using for topwater fishing. And the other, 1% or 10% is going to be varying the rods just a little bit. And but pretty much this is what I'm running as far as when I'm running topwater plugs. And I fish a lot of different topwater plugs, and I also fish Danny plugs a lot. I fish needlefish. There's a lot of other lures, but I'm talking about my hardcore things that when I'm like, okay, I'm gonna topwater fish, it's spooks and pencils. Those are the two main things. Everything else I kind of fall under a subsurface, just under the surface of the water category, which I think Danny plugs kind of fall under for me. Even though, yeah, they're on the surface and you can see the bass eat them when they eat it, but it's just under the surface enough sometimes that I'm going to call it not technically a topwater plug. And then needlefish is something that I don't fish as much, and so I'm going to really talk about what I would fish, and also I fish them at night, so it doesn't kind of make sense to put it in this. But these are daytime topwater plugs that I use primarily. And I know there's other chugging topwater style, Polaris popper style plugs, which I actually really love fishing, but really I'm talking about plugs that I'm catching trophy bass on, and I'm talking about bass well into 40 inches and well into 40 pounds as well. So let's really get into it. And I want to just talk about the plugs that I use. And I'm obviously sponsored by Pumbaa Plugs, and I fish mostly Pumbaa plugs. But before I ever really fished Pumbaa plugs, I fished many other spooks, and I found that spooks are very productive plugs, but there's always something that made me angry about spooks, and that was that they dive under the surface of the water. And when you're working them, if you mess up working them. And the great thing about Pumbaa plugs is they don't dive under the surface. In their Pumbaa Magnum walkers, it doesn't dive under the surface. And it also has good casting because it is a wooden plug. And so all of those factors really, to me, make it one of the best spooks that I've ever used. Because I've used a handful of spooks, and honestly, it's got to be the best spook I've ever used. And it catches monster fish. I've had bass up to 27 inches on it this year, which is mid 40 pound fish. And so I've had multiple 30 pounders. The reality of this is the spooks catch monster fish, and that's such a cool thing. And I talk a lot with Joe, the guy who builds these plugs, and I fish much bigger tackle than most people do, and fight my fish a lot harder than most people do. So I have to end up bumping up the gear on the plugs. But all of his plugs come with 4X strong VMC hooks, which 90% of the time are not going to get bent out. I still have 4X strong hooks on my pencil. I've caught many big fish on that, and but I'm starting to, what you got to do is you got to test and through trial and error see what works best. You put inline singles on stuff, you have trebles on other stuff, and through that evolution of fishing, you'll come out the other end with the best product. And the crazy thing about fishing, not the crazy thing, but something that definitely happens, is the evolution of the gear and the hooks. And each year hooks come out and they're better and better. And I've used a lot of different hooks. I really like VMC. VMCs are solid quality hooks. I also really like Owner. Owner has a bunch of really, really strong hooks. And correct me if I'm wrong, these are almost small tuna grade hooks. They're close to it, at least. And I have stinger hooks on that, like inline stinger hooks on that, on the other Magnum Walker, and both I've caught fish with. And I just recently put on the inline singles. I've been fishing the trebles for a while now. And I've landed the 47-incher with these trebles, this exact plug. And this plug is really beaten up, but I've had this now for 2 years. This is one of the first Magnum Walkers I've ever gotten. And I've got more fish on this plug than, well, I mean, I've caught more bass that have been huge on this plug. I've beaten this thing off rocks. There's only a few nicks and scratches on this plug. But, you know, it builds character. The thing still catches fish, and I still throw it. And this plug has caught so many monster bass. It's caught multiple 30-pounders. It's caught multiple 40-pounders. But I think that a lot of fishing with topwater plugs is, you can fish them everywhere, but I fish a lot off the rocks, and I need big, heavy gear off the rocks, and that's why I'm using such big treble hooks, because I'm fishing with my drag maxed out all the time. That's how I fish, and when you're fishing with your drag maxed out like this, you bend hooks. And I have one time I was fishing, this is a few weeks ago, or well, not a few weeks before I switched, but yeah, so I was fishing earlier in the season, and I got into a school of big fish. I had one bass eat the plug and bend my, I think I actually had a 6X strong VMC on it straight, and it bent it straight out. And I lost that fish, but luckily and fortunately I was able to get an even bigger fish next cast. It was an even bigger 30-pound bass, and that was really cool. But the less fish that you lose, the better, obviously. And so to increase the ability of you not losing fish, you need to kind of mess around with the hardware on your plugs a little bit. And I've loved these owner hooks because not only are these stronger than my VMCs, the shape of the hook makes it much more difficult for a bass, once it gets hooked, to become then unhooked. And that's really big for me, because I've dropped way too many fish this season. Where, like, you know, I hook into a bass, it's shaking, it's thrashing, it goes into a run, and my hook either pulls or it spits the hook or whatever. I've had that happen twice to me in the last 2 days, and one on that pencil right there, which I will get to pencil popping. But I really started off the year with spooks, and spooks primarily for those larger fish. And I want to talk about structure for bigger fish. What I've really found is the best structure for topwater fishing, especially for big striped bass, is when you have a rocky cliff that drops off into deep, deep water, and there's big boulders and when I'm talking about big boulders, I'm talking about giant house-sized boulders that are coming up closer to the surface and creating disturbance. And if you can find that like the beginning of a cove, or off of a point, or off of a really like flat wall, something that's just going to grab those fish and like put them into that scenario where they get locked onto that structure, that's what's going to hold those bigger fish. And so in one spot that I'm fishing in particular, there's submerged boulders that are a little further out, and what I'm doing is I'm casting my plug onto these, you know, on top of where these boulders are, and it's probably 50 feet deep, but they're humongous boulders. And what's happening is that's a good enough structure that the bass are sitting on top of that or on the sides of that. And when this giant spook on these flat, calm days is walking back and forth, these guys see it from miles away. Not really, but they see it and they come flying up. And it's crazy, the culling power of a spook. And the culling power of a spook is the fact that it can literally get a bass that is deep in the water to see it and come swim, sometimes multiple feet. You know, it could swim up to 10, 15 feet deep, all the way up to eat the plug. And that's what's extraordinary, that fish is gonna see this and be so attracted to it that it needs to come from so far down in the water all the way up and eat the plug. And that's something that I don't even think pencils have. I think spooks are very, it's a very specific way of fishing, but I do think that if you can find that structure where, you know, there's big bass and they're down deep, the one thing that's going to really get them up and out of that deep water is going to be the pencil. Is going to be the spook, and a Magnum Walker is a bigger spook. You can work it in many different ways, and I found multiple different ways that they've been eating it. I've done everything from casting out there and just doing a normal zigzaggy all the way in, connecting each turn of the plug as it's coming in, to then having it where you have the plug, you cast it out there, lands in the water, you go pop, stop, pop, pop, and it's not pop, but it's like you're sweeping your rod a little bit, and the thing kind of turns and swims, and then turns and swims, and it looks like an injured bunker, turning on the surface. And I've talked about that. If you've ever snagged bunker and you've hooked them through the lip or whatever, when they're injured, they go right up to the surface, and when they're getting scared, they look exactly like a spook on the surface. And that's why those bass just can't handle it when they see this thing going across the surface. If it looks like an injured bunker, they're going to come up and whack that, or pogey, or Atlantic menhaden, whatever you want to call it. This is what the bass are in my area feeding on primarily, so something yellow over white is super clutch and really key to getting those big fish to come up and eat it. And it just looks so much like a bunker on the surface doing that twitch, but you can do it super slowly, where it's literally hopping to one side and then to the other if the bass are being super slow, super sluggish and finicky. But then if that's not working and the bass are just following it, and you see them swirling on it, but they're not really eating it, then what you can do then is you can do something that, there's different levels to this, but you can start really thrashing it, where you have the plug kind of hop out of the water and splash and thrash and kind of jump out of the water, and you rip it a little bit, and what it does is it catches the water and it's thrashing, and it's just creating this disturbance on the surface, but you're reeling it pretty fast, and I'm reeling it and I'm thrashing it like that, so it's still kind of working, but it's just smashing around on the surface, and it looks like a distraught bait fish, and the bass come up and smash that. And I've had bass up to 40 pounds leap out of the water behind a plug that's doing that. And then if you want to take it one step further, you're working the plug and the bass is just not, it's following it, but it's not really going after it and eating it. Reel it straight across the surface of the water as fast as you can, and that thing will just skip right across the surface of the water, and the bass, I'm kid you not, this is how I caught my biggest bass of the season on Topwater. Literally wasn't paying attention, thought I had seaweed on the plug, was reeling as fast as I could. The plug is, no joke, skipping across the surface of the water. 40-pound bass, boof, eats it, gone. And sometimes they want it really aggressively worked, and when there's a lot of bunker around, and the bass are deep and they're aggressive, you work the plug really hard and aggressively, they're going to see that, and they're going to really that's going to get them like frothed up and going for it. And that's really cool, especially if you can get bass with competition. Now, this is a whole other part to topwater fishing, but it's so important you can rise single fish, but it's important if the bass is in a school, and most of the time, at least where I've been catching them, these big fish have been in schools, so it has that competition factor, and that's what makes them even more aggressive. And if you can get that competition factor down, it's kind of lights out fishing, because those bass will pack attack and eat it because they want to get that meal before their friend does, and that is super, super important. And now we can kind of talk a little bit about the inline single game versus the trebles. Trebles kill fish straight up. I've killed bass because the treble hooks get them under the gills, and it's just nasty. So after killing a slot-sized fish with a Magnum Walker with the trebles on it, I'm like, okay, I don't want to do that anymore. Yeah, it's not a big deal. I only take fish that are gonna die or have already died. But I don't want to kill these fish. So how do I make it easier on the bass? And something that I've been against a lot is fishing single hooks on topwater plugs. I just think that the hookup ratio is far worse. Now, I haven't used this a lot, granted, because we haven't had, since I put these on, I've only had one day where I was able to use this, and they weren't feeding on spooks. They wanted the pencil, and that's sometimes how it is. But I did catch one fish on this. It was small, 25-incher. It hit it probably 15 times. Not really, but it hit it probably 5 times. Like, legitimately hit it 5 times. And it finally got hooked by the tail. Now, Could have been because it's a small fish. Also could have been because it was hitting the plug a bunch of times and it was just missing the hooks. Now that's something you kind of have to deal with. But the pro to this is, number one, it's stronger than any treble hook you can get. And number two, once a big fish gets hooked by this, it's not going to be unhooked. Like once a single hook penetrates into a bass, there's such a, like, keep tension on that. Like, that's all the fish is going to get. And that treble hook is going to keep it, or that barb rather, is going to keep the fish pinned. No matter if it's hooked on this one or it's hooked on this one, it's going to stay pinned with these a lot better than it is on treble hooks. And that's just a fact. So there's payoffs to fishing with singles versus trebles. I need to do more experimenting with the trebles versus singles, but I've done super well to call these bigger fish, and I hope that when I have a shot at a really large fish, these hooks are gonna not fail me in the sense of, like, if I get one bass hit it 3 or 4 times, would have I hooked it with treble hooks and at least had a shot at the fish, versus hooking it with singles and not having a shot at or not hooking a fish on with the single hooks and not having a shot on it. Now, for all I know, the fish could just inhale the plug and you'll get hooked. You'll hook him. But sometimes they're being finicky and they kind of swipe at it. And when they're swiping at it, you're not going to hook them with singles. Your best bet is with a treble, but you also might kill the fish. Now, there's so many different factors to this. And there's no real right or wrong way to do it. There's no regulations against anything. So it's personal preference. And, in some aspects, single hooks are better than trebles, and some they're not. And I just need more time and experimentation to figure this all out. Now, the hooks that I've been using and the ones that I found are the strongest hooks. Now, these are breaking your bank for sure. These are expensive hooks. They're way too expensive. But if you really want to hook into a big fish and you're in really, really heavy structure and you want to fight it with the heaviest drag you can and not worry about your gear breaking you or failing on you, you need to use the best hooks you can get. And I'm fortunate enough that I can use these, but they're going to break the bank. So I'm using Owner treble hooks. These are the ST-76TN 5X strong hooks, size 3. I think I'm almost 100% sure that these are the same size. The size 3 are the ones that I have on the Magnum Walker, and it's not taking the action out of it. The thing that you can do, though, is you can weigh the hooks with the split rings, and if they weigh the same, they're going to be perfectly fine in the plug. That's how I mess around with singles, inline singles. I'm also using Owner stinger hooks, and these are SJ41 stinger hooks, and these are the size 9 hooks, and these are also Owner, and those are the ones that I'm using on the Magnum too. I am going to try putting these on the pencil, but I'm going to get to that in a second. I'm literally going to go to the tackle store today and put them on the pencil, but I'm going to get to that in a second. Those are the hooks that I'm using right now on my plugs. You can look them up. They're really strong. They won't bend if you're really fighting fish hard, which I do with the gear that I have. You kind of need to. But you heard, that I'm fishing in deep water, and when I'm fishing in super deep water, I'm not stressed out about having super heavy drag. But as soon as I bring in the pencil popper into the equation, I'm going to be fishing in a lot shallower water, and I'm going to end up being in a lot more sketchy scenarios. Now, this is not saying that you can't hook a really big fish on a pencil in deep open water with one giant submerged boulder on. And to me, one giant submerged boulder is a very hard thing for a bass to kind of get you around, because that means it has to get you around a whole lot to really break you off. And a big fish with a medium amount of drag is not going to get you around. Like, it will run, but it's not going to like really go too hard. And I've caught some really big fish, and I've had them pull 35 to 50 yards of drag sometimes, and especially that 40-pounder did. And I just stuck with them. I let them take the drag, and then I reeled them in. And that fish didn't get me around anything because he was in open water. I was able to keep him up. I knew that he was only running out. He wasn't running down. And that's really hard for a fish to run down when they're hooked and you're fighting them by pulling them up. They'll get down a little bit, but they're not going to get like 10 feet down where they need to really break you off. Now, this is a whole other story when it comes to fishing in shallower structure, and I've had a lot of horror stories this season where I broke off on many large fish in shallow boulder fields. It happens. It's part of the game. It's part of what fuels my drive to catch these fish, is because it's not a sure thing anymore. When you get to a certain size bass, it's never a sure thing that you're going to hook into that fish. And if you think about it, you only get a handful of those opportunities a year, and you don't want to blow any of them. And I blew a bunch of them this season just because I've been hooking into more fish. So last year, I think I only lost 2 fish out of the entire season. And that is ridiculous. That's like on another level of like being good with like hooking into these fish. Now, that was because I landed a ton. Now I couldn't even count how many bass over 40 inches I caught last year. But the crazy thing is, I only lost 1 fish, and I've lost so many more fish this season, and that's because I probably doubled the amount of big fish that I've hooked this season, which is even more extraordinary. And that's and most of that's during the day. There's been a pretty good stretch in which I'd say it's probably been about 2 months where almost every single day I'm hooking into a 40-inch bass. 40 plus inch bass. So that just shows you and sometimes it's like +2, and other days I don't catch anything. It's obviously it's dependent on weather and tide and moons and whatever. But even the in between moon phases, if I'm getting good flat greasy calm conditions at sunrise or sunset, and if it's not greasy calm conditions and I get a little bit of wind blowing on shore, I can go out there 12 noon and catch fish, which is what I did on the pencil. But okay, I guess I'll get into the pencil right now. So I talked a little bit about the spooks. I talked a little about how I'm working the spooks. So you can kind of keep that in mind. You got to learn how to work spook, and you can go on my YouTube channel and dig around under the quick tips, because I do have a quick tip on how to work a spook. It's actually the Walker. So you'll be able to see how I work the spooks, and that's how I generally just get them to work back and forth. Now, if you can do that and speed it up and slow it down, that's how you're going to get those different variations of moods of the fish. If they're being like lazy fish, you want to go slower, and if they're being super aggressive, sometimes they won't hit just back and forth, medium speed to it. Which is what I always start with, because even if they're lazier or even if they're more aggressive, you'll get that in between with the in between, obviously. So okay, so we're getting into the next thing. I do have the line. I want to go through the whole setup that I'm using here. Line, all the way down to the rod reel line, swivel, TA clip, like all of that stuff I'm going to talk about here. But we'll go into the pencil first. So I've been using the small Pumbaa pencil. Now, the small Pumbaa pencil is very interesting because this is the generation 1 of the small Pumbaa pencil. So now when we were designing this, me and Joe were designing this plug, it came off of the Tinker. So he had a plug that had no belly hook and only a single treble, which I don't like personally, because I think most of the time the bass are going to T-bone the plug and eat it that way. And if you only have one treble hook on the back, you kind of lose that center of mass hit from the fish. You're only banking on the fish sucking it in from behind, which they do, and I've seen happen, but it was like I was not a huge fan of. So what I said to start it off, I was like, okay, what I would like to do is put center hook on this plug, and just see how it works. And through a few generations of this, he made it a little bit thicker. He ended up making it a little bit different. And there's nothing bad about that plug. I've caught many bass up to 35 inches on that. But there's something about this Tinker that turned into the small Pumbaa pencil that we're kind of redesigning the small Pumbaa pencil around this, just because it's a thinner pencil. It's a little bit lighter. So the big Pumbaa pencil, or the small Pumbaa pencil as it stands is 2.3 ounces. This is 1.9 ounces. It's like a centimeter longer than, they're about the same actually. That's a lie. So it's not a centimeter longer, but they're both like 6 inches, and but this throws more water. So what I'm talking about is when you're working the plug, it goes like that and it goes like that. And when it does that, it sprays water on both sides. And spraying that water when it's going like this is important. The other Puma pencil is a little bit higher, rides a little bit lower. It does more of that deeper in the water. And what happens is with that is it still works, casts further and heavier winds. There's advantages to that for sure. And that's not degrading that plug as it is. It just is not as big of a big fish plug as this one is. And that's why I want to switch the small Puma pencil, and this will happen in time. I think we're going to end up going with this being the small Puma pencil just because it catches bigger fish, or we might design something in between both. We're not entirely sure yet, but I'm just giving you a sneak peek and kind of the evolution of why this is such a good plug. Now, this is the only one I think probably the only one ever made of this plug. And it rides in a certain way, and it throws water in a certain way, and it has a certain noise when it's flat calm that just gets these big fish to launch out of the water behind these things. And I've hooked many big fish. I think I've hooked 4 over 40 inches on this, a few 45s, all on this one plug. And I haven't lost it yet, and I probably will, but I came really close the other day. And I don't know if you've been really fishing on Cape Ann very much, or really around Cape Ann, but there's a giant like tropical storm that moved through, and the waves are out of this world. And I'll get into some crazy stories after this about that. But it's like they're huge waves. It's almost unfishable, the amount of white water in certain areas. But I have one spot that's been producing, and it produces during these hurricanes. And there's so much white water in this area, and there wasn't a lot of green water, but I could get it into a zone where there was. Now, it's fairly shallow there, but these waves are crashing. Now, if you think about these huge sets of waves were crashing in, and then when it would be calm for a moment, that's when you could get your pencil out there in between those waves, and you could work it and shred up the surface. Now, this tiny 6-inch pencil in the vast, giant, loud ocean at this time, with the chop and the wind and everything, had a mid 40-inch bass go airborne on this. Literally jumped out of the water, and I see this fish, hadn't got a hit all day, and I kid you not, it was a good 44 inches, big fish, jump airborne out of the water. Now there's another big wave coming, and then as this big wave comes, I'm still working. Now it's airborne under the water, and there's a big wave behind it, and then the plug just goes, poof, disappears. Now, I see that happening. It disappears in some way, and I think he just slurped the tail of it, and this fish takes off into a ridiculous run, starts screaming drag. The wave crashes onto my line, bows my line a little bit under the weight of that wave, and then that snap back pops the hook out of its face. So I lost that fish. But what also happened in that time that it was screaming out line, I felt it against a rock. Now, who knows what would have happened if I didn't have that wave pop my stuff off, but whatever happened between that wave and the rock, it gave enough slack for that fish to shake the hook. Now, what the takeaway from this is, it was windy. It was really windy. It was really choppy, and there was a bunch of big waves. Now, in that entire time period, this tiny little 6-inch pencil was able to get shred the water up enough to get that fish to see it. And now, I'm probably fishing 5-8 feet of water there. That a fishable the fish sitting in. That fish is sitting in 5-8 feet of water into these very seaweedy like mats that are like seaweed and mussel, barnacle, like gnarly stuff, and snaps your line like that if you get to it. So you're pretty much hopeless if the bass can get you down there. Now, I hooked in that fish. I didn't have the drag on tight. Like I had it set to what I would be fishing in those deep boulder fields, so I was like, okay, it's enough that it maintains pressure to this fish, and this is not an insignificant amount of pressure. It's a good amount of pressure, but it's not. It just, I didn't want to bend these hooks. So these are probably they're 4x strong, size 2 VMCs or something like that, I would assume, and this scares me. Now, for what I was fishing, this really scares me, hooking 45-inch bass or 44. I don't know. It was a big fish, a mid 40-incher. It wasn't like a Goliath, but it was giant. It was a big fish. And if I put too much pressure on this hook, if it was hooked by one of the trebles, I don't know which one it was hooked by, but if it was, it would have bent this straight like that, especially a hook of this size and especially on a fish of that size. So, I need to switch up, and I am going to put owners on this, but I might end up having, I don't even know if they create a small enough hook that will work on this plug, but we'll find out shortly. And that's that's the problem that we're dealing with here. Okay, so we're fishing in the rocks, and we have to stop these monster fish before they get you into these rocks, which are, at most, you're fishing in a 10, 15-foot gap from the top of these boulders to where these bass are going to be eating your plugs. And on the low end, you're fishing in 4 feet of water, 3 feet of water, big fish just cruising these shallows, and that's where they're going to come up, hit you, and get you right into a rock instantly. Now, that's a very difficult scenario to fish, but you can do it if you have the heavy enough gear. The reason I was fishing in that zone is because the place that I was wanting to fish, I couldn't catch a fish out of it because there's too much whitewater. And that place where I hooked that big fish, everything was kind of dumping out into, and it was shallower, and I was like, I don't trust this gear in here, but I'm gonna do it anyway, and hopefully I can get that fish out of the zone. Now I don't know what would have happened. I do think I would have been able to get that fish out of it. It was almost at the end of its first run. It kind of got me into a rock a little bit, and it was a heavy fish, and I was pulling on him good amount, but it gave enough slack that it popped it, and that happens. Unfortunately, it's part of the game. But what I really hate is when there's so much bow in your line, which is what happens when there's that much current and that much white water and waves, that you can't maintain enough pressure. And I had that happen last night on a darter. I hooked an absolute behemoth, probably well into 40 pounds. And it got same thing. Wave hit it. There's enough bow in the line, and it popped my hook on me. And that's why I'm also going to be switching to the owner hooks on that as well. And that's just all because I think the owners are going to have bigger barbs. The way the hooks are shaped, they hold fish better. And yeah. But the even crazier thing is I broke off multiple times last night, and I need my gears heavy, but I'm going to end up having to bump it up even more, which is just ridiculous. Okay. But back to like pencils. You can fish pencils in many different ways. I hooked a 43 in fairly deep, flat, calm water the other day where the bass were being finicky, and I was just shredding this on the surface. It was right at the beginning of my cast, just and it's throwing a lot of water, and it looks great on the surface, and then all of a sudden, boom, fish literally 43-inch bass, T-bones the plug, jumps 4 feet in the air, lands in the water, boom, I'm into him. And that one was hooked by both hooks, literally ate the plug long ways, and was hooked by both hooks. The whole mouth was hooked by the hooks. And that's like best case scenario when you can hook a fish like that. But and he didn't really fight very hard. I was able to get that guy in. That was no problem. And that was just a fun fish. And that's the goal. You want to have fun with these fish, and you don't want to be like trying to like kill them or kill that. You don't want them to kill you by trying to get them out of this crazy structure. So you kind of have to play your gear to that. And now I'm going to go into really the gear that I'm using, or the rods that I'm using, rod, reel, line. And this will make slightly more sense to you guys at this point now as far as my go-to daytime setup. Just because it's big enough that it's going to hold these fish back, and it's also light enough that you can still have fun and work some of the smaller pencils. Because if you go with too big of a reel, I have a much harder time working a small pencil and a big reel, and that's where things get tricky. But my go-to setup here is a Lamiglass GSB 10 foot 3 to 7 ounce. Let's see where's the stuff here. 10 foot 3 to 7 ounce Lamiglass GSB. So it's the blank model is the GSB 1201M S or OS, whatever. So that's the model of the GSB Lamiglass rod that I've been using. I have it on a VSX 200 Van Staal spooled with 50-pound Power Pro Max Quattro line to a what is this? Is it? This is the. I know it's the Seagar, but this is like a green. Maybe it's the green label Seagar or whatever. I'm just trying to see what the actual name for this is, or fluorocarbon, whatever you want to call it. Smaller diameter, low strength. So pretty much like I'm using. What is the name of this though? There's got to be a specific name. I'm probably not seeing the name. it's Fluoro Premier line. So this is, I guess, the other one that I used a lot of the Blue Label, but I've been using the Fluoro Premier cigar, or Green Label cigar, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. And this is 60 pounds, so that's like as low as I'm going right now, 60 pound line. It's stronger, it's lower, thinner diameter, and really, it's just a little bit stronger of a line. And I don't have a huge leader on that, but it's not going to save you. If you get brought into a rock, it's going to break you off pretty quick. This is really just primarily for that initial hit and shock absorbent of that first big hit of a big fish. And it does what it does pretty well, and it doesn't break on me. And that's the thing. Like, I think that a 50-pound fluorocarbon leader would break before my 50-pound braid would break. So that's why I'm bumping up to 60. And it does have that slightly more abrasion resistance, but barely. And I have that attached to a Spro Pro swivel, attached to a tactical angler's clip. And I'm tying the improved clench knot for the fluorocarbon and the polymer knot for the braided line. And this is the setup I'm running right here. Now, if I'm gonna let's just see what drag I'm gonna run on this. So I don't know what I'm set at right here. Not a lot. Let's just tighten that up. Probably one or two clicks more than this would be what I'm gonna be fishing if I'm fishing in a boulder in like deep water. So probably, I don't know. Yeah, I'm fishing like that, which is, I don't know exactly. Do I have my measuring thing here? I might have it. Oh, I do. I can tell you the exact drag pressure I'm fishing right now. Literally, I can. It's right here. Okay. So this is like me fishing in deep boulder fields. So the whole goal of this drag right here in this drag setting is to maintain pressure to a fish. That's the entire point of this heavy drag, or of drag being this heavy. So if that makes any sense to you, how are we gonna do this? Hopefully this doesn't screw my line up too bad. I could probably wrap it like that, maybe. Trying to see what the best way to do this would be. Game time decision here, right? Okay. Maybe if I just loop this around like this. Okay. We're struggling here, but it's okay. This is, you get to see the rawest of things right here. I just want this to be primarily on that. Maybe I need to just attach it to that. Okay, yeah. This is how we're gonna do this. Okay, I figured it out. I just don't have anything. I do have, actually. I lied. I have something that I can cut it with. Okay, we're in business. We're in business here. I just don't want to waste too much of my line. Okay, let's cut it this. I didn't know I was going to do this on the video, but now that I'm talking about it, it's probably good for you guys to understand exactly how heavy my drag is set for different scenarios. And especially for topwater fishing, because there's different schools of thought. Like, you need your drag to be light, so when that fish initially grabs the plug, you don't yank it out of its mouth. You want your drag to be super tight, so that when the fish eats, it stays pinned, gets hooked on it hook sets itself on the eat. Yeah, you know what? Maybe I would go a little bit lighter than that. That's a little bit egregiously heavy. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, like that's exactly what I would have it. Like if I was to say, okay, I'm fishing in a deep boulder field with my 50 to 50 setup here, and I want to keep it pinned, not pinned as in like the drag pinned, but pinned as in like the fish not coming unhooked. This is the drag that I'm going to have on this fish. Let's see what we got here. Tie it up. I don't know. Just do a few overhand knots. Hopefully that will hold enough. And this is kind of interesting because I feel I've done this once before in the winter time just to see what max drag on the Van Stall is. And what I've been doing a lot of this year is I'm fishing such heavy gear that I don't want to to break my hooks or my leader or anything. So what I'll do is I'll initially hook into that fish and weather that first initial burst of energy for a little bit, and then I'm going to loosen up and let it waste some energy once I get it out of the danger zone. Okay, so turn this on, zero it out. Okay, zero it out. So I have 4 pounds of drag on this. Is that right? Yeah. So I have 4 pounds of drag, 4.8 I think is what it said. 4.8 pounds of drag set for my fighting off of a boulder field. And that right there, yeah, 4.2 will hold, will keep a fish pinned, more or less. That's not a lot of drag, like compared to what I'm talking about. This is me having fun with a big fish. Now, I will tighten that up a little bit if it starts to scare me. Now, say that this fish is huge and it's starting to get me lower. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten it a crank and a half probably. So this is my crank and a half of drag. Let me just feel what this is, because I want this to be raw. Yeah, I'd actually go a little bit tighter than that. Like if I was starting to get a little spooked by how hard, yeah, okay, there you go. This is me starting to get a little bit spooked about how hard this fish is pulling or it's getting me into the danger zone. Okay, let's just zero this thing out again. Okay, that's it. That was like 7.8. So what I said, I'll do that one more time. So 7.8 pounds of drag. Is this in pounds? Yeah, LBs. Yeah, it's in pounds. So 7.8 pounds of drag is what I'm going to be fishing if I start to get spooked a little bit and I'm wanting to okay, I want to tire this fish out a little bit more because he's starting to get me into a zone where I'm getting a little bit spooked. Now we're going to go fishing into a boulder field. So I'm pencil popping. The fish are, they're in a bad zone, and I'm pencil popping. This is my striking drag to the fish that I need to turn the bass before it gets me into a nasty zone. Okay, let's see what this is at. Oop. The knot pulled. The knot pulled on that. Let's try that again. Yeah, I literally just tied a few overhand knots, so it wasn't like I was doing anything crazy. Yeah, hold on, let me just get this down again. Yeah, so that just shows you, it's actually less than I thought it was, but it's pretty crazy, because I do fish a lot of locked down drag, but that shows you that when I hooked a 40-pounder on an eel earlier in the year, and this was a big fish. It was 48 inches, and it was in a tight boulder field. So I had my drag locked on my VSX 275, which was like 25 pounds of drag or something crazy like that. That was it really turning and running as hard as it could with locked drag and almost pulling me in the water, that type of thing, which is pretty crazy. All right, let's reel this down again. Come on. Oy. Alright, sick. Okay, let's do this again. Okay, zeroing it out. Zeroed out. Okay, sick. Alright, so this is me striking drag in a boulder field. So that was around 13.8 pounds of striking drag in a boulder field. And the reason I have that as how heavy it is, which is not ridiculous, but it's up there. It's starting to get up there. And the reason I have that for what it is because that is not ridiculous amount of drag, but what it's going to do is it's going to keep that fish out of the boulder fields, and it's not going to be maxing out my hooks, and it's also not going to be maxing out my leader. Now, this is like legitimately This is as heavy as I would feel comfortable on VMC 4X strong hooks. Now, I'll show you what the drag was that I had when I bent out 6X strong hooks on this bass. And that was, that was a big fish. So this is what I had it set at. And this would also be my scared, like, bass is going to get me into a boulder type setting for drag. And maybe even my eel striking drag. Ooh, God. Oh, the line broke. So there you go. Too heavy. That's how heavy that is. Anyway, but that's me scared trying to stop a fish. Now it's going to be a slower incremental hit into it, and I'm glad that we tested this out, because if I did that on a fish, which I could very easily do, that would have been so sad. If I hooked a fish like that and it broke me off. So this was a good thing to do. Check my line, check your knots, make sure it doesn't break you. But there you go. So, and I'm sure that was probably around 20. That's almost locked. So I think the lock drag on this is like on the VSX 200 is like 20 pounds is what I got a read of. So yeah. So there you go. That's what I'm gonna be setting up. If I'm gonna be fishing, man, I'm like whacking everything here. Is what I'm gonna be. Those are the drag settings I'm gonna have for big fish. Whether I'm fishing with the spook, whether I'm fishing with my pencil, that's what I want for my drag. And it's so important to have heavy drag on a big fish. It just is. If they're in shorts, if they're in like 4 or 5 feet of water, 6 feet of water, you need that heavy drag to get them up. And what we said that was 13.8, so almost 14 pounds of drag. And that's pretty much perfect for like me not breaking my gear. Like, I don't think my line would break. Don't think my leader would break. That's when I would start to get sketched out about my hooks starting to bend. And I will fish that drag for as least amount of time as I can. Like if I hook into the fish and it takes off on a screaming run and then it slows down and I'm starting to turn it, I'm loosening my drag. That's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to loosen my drag up. And you'll see it in almost every single one of the striped bass hunt shows where I'm eeling. I have my striking drag, which is going to be almost maxed out Van Staal on either the 275 or the 200, and every single time I'm going to loosen up a few clicks, because that's my initial striking drag. That's the drag I'm going to use to make sure that hook gets pinned into the fish, and that's also the drag that I'm going to use to stop a bass if he gets me in a sketchy area right off the bat, because then I can turn him and get him away from that a little bit. Then I'm going to loosen up and let him get his energy out, and then I'm going to bring him in, and I'm going to land him, because yesterday I did a fatal flaw and I tried to land a bass too fast. Hooked him first cast, wasn't expecting it, fought the fish, probably 44, 45 and incher, so big bass. And I get him up, I'm trying to pull him over this boulder, and the wave sucks him back out, snaps my line. That's like part of the game. That's what happens. You snap your line if you're an idiot, and I was an idiot and I snapped my line. I feel like the smarter you get in fishing, the smarter you get in fishing, and also there are moments where you're an idiot, and that was one of the moments where I was an idiot, and I didn't do what I should have done, and I knew as soon as I did it, I was like, why did I do that? Because I was rushing and being careless, and that's the thing, like, you can rush and be careless, and then you can rush and be careless and be confident that you're going to land a fish, which sometimes actually helps you in the long run, but because then you're just not as you won't make as many like rushed or like nervous mistakes as you will if you were nervous to land that fish. But you also will make, if you're too confident and too cocky about it, you will end up losing the fish most of the time. And I think I hit that point where I got a little bit too confident trying to land that fish. And you can see the next 2 fish that I hooked in that episode, or I hooked in that day, that I landed, I really babied them in. I let them take their time, calmed themselves down, and then I proceeded to land that fish after it was tired and not in Because what happened was that fish turned on the rock and started swimming out with the wave and it snapped me, which you can't have it do. So the fact that my line just snapped like that makes me want to get new line on this reel. I need to spool up some reels for sure. For what I do and the amount of big fish that I catch, you probably need to spool your reel twice a season. That's another thing you should probably think about. If you fish every single day for the entirety of the season, like I do, and I fish every single day and 3 times a day, but I don't fish every reel every day, or like 3 times a day, I guess. So like I'll probably, I fish this reel at least once to maybe even 3 times a day, but most of the time at least once a day I'll fish that reel. And this line is in and out of the guides, often, hits every once in a while it bounces off a rock and you snap it. This is also starting to get a little frayed. So when your line starts to get fuzzy like this, which I can see fuzzy even all the way down here, which is sketch, you want to cut your line. That's a big no-no. And I'm gonna I gotta go to the tackle store after this regardless, so I need to get 3 reels spooled up with line, which is always a sad day because that's so expensive. Anyway, so I think that we really covered as much of topwater fishing as a topic that I feel like I should have. If I missed anything, you guys just leave comments below if you have any more questions. I'll either feature them in other podcasts or future podcast, or I will or I'll answer them right there if it's just an easy answer. But thank you guys so much for listening and tuning into this podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.